Taxable estates and trusts. Aside from citizens and aliens, taxable estates and trusts are also individual income taxpayers. I will first discuss estate. Estate refers to the properties, rights, and obligations of a deceased person not extinguished by his death. Of course, pag namatay yung isang tao, meron siyang iiwan na properties, rights, and obligations sa kanyang heirs or mga tagapagmana. Now, meron tayong dalawang klase ng estate. We have estate under judicial settlement and we also have estate under extrajudicial settlement. What's the difference between judicial settlement and extrajudicial settlement? When we say judicial settlement, this is initiated by filing an appropriate petition in the court. Meaning to say, para ma-divide o ma-partition yung mga properties na iniwan ng deceased person sa kanyang heirs, kailangan pumunta yung mga heirs sa korte. That's why tinawag din siya as judicial settlement. From the word itself, judicial, that means there should be an intervention of the court. On the other hand, pag sinabi naman nating extrajudicial settlement, this is a settlement of the estate outside of the court. This means that the heirs do not have to go to court to partition the properties left by the deceased person. Sa extrajudicial settlement, hindi na kailangang pumunta ng mga heirs sa korte para mahati or hatiin yung mga properties na iniwan ng deceased person or yung namatay. Estate under judicial settlement is treated as an individual taxpayer. The estate is taxable on the income of the properties left by the decedent. Decedent is another term for the deceased person or yung patay. Dito sa estate under judicial settlement, ang taxable is yung estate mismo with respect to the income of the properties left by the deceased person. While estate under extrajudicial settlement is an exempt entity. Since this is an exempt entity, this is not considered as a taxpayer. But the income of the properties of the estate under extrajudicial settlement is taxable to the heirs. So, ang palagi niyong tatandaan dito is that pag estate under judicial settlement, ang taxable is yung estate mismo. But sa estate under extrajudicial settlement, ang taxable is yung mga heirs or mga tagapagmana. I will give examples. We will indicate the proper classification or appropriate classification for each of the following. First, an estate of a Filipino citizen judicially administered in Japan. It says here that the estate is judicially administered. Since this is judicially administered, this is an estate under judicial settlement. At alam naman natin na pag estate under judicial settlement, this is treated as an individual taxpayer. Now, our problem is to indicate the appropriate classification for the estate of a Filipino citizen judicially administered in Japan. It says here that this is an estate of a Filipino citizen. So, pag Filipino citizen, sabi ko, dalawa lang ang pwede niyang maging classification. Either resident citizen or non-resident citizen. Ngayon, ang titignan nyo kung saan ba siya judicially administered. Sa loob ba ng Pilipinas or sa ibang bansa? Sabi dito sa ating statement, Japan. It is judicially administered in Japan. So meaning to say, this will not fall as a resident citizen but rather non-resident citizen. So ang estate of a Filipino citizen judicially administered in Japan is a non-resident citizen. Next is an estate of a Filipino citizen judicially administered in the Philippines. Parang example number 1. Pero nga lang, ang pinagkaiba is that this is an estate of a Filipino citizen under judicial settlement in the Philippines. So sabi niya, in the Philippines, kaya ang magiging classification nito ay resident citizen. Next is an estate of a Filipino citizen extrajudicially administered in the Philippines. I already discussed that an estate under extrajudicial settlement is an exempt entity. So since exempt entity, hindi siya pwedeng mapabilang as a resident citizen or non-resident citizen. So an estate of a Filipino citizen extrajudicially administered here in the Philippines is not a taxpayer. Let's proceed to trust. A trust is an arrangement whereby one person transfers property to another person which will be held under the management of a third party. Meron tayong tatlong parties dito sa trust. The person who transfers property is called grantor or trustor. The person whom the property is transferred is called beneficiary. And the person who manages the property is called trustee or fiduciary. Kung sa estate, meron tayong individual taxpayer at hindi individual taxpayer, ganon din sa trust. Sa trust, meron din tayong individual taxpayer at meron ding trust na hindi individual taxpayer. Para malaman natin kung individual taxpayer ba yung trust or hindi, kailangan muna nating alamin kung revocable ba yung trust or irrevocable. Kung irrevocable yung trust, this is an individual taxpayer. The income of the property held in trust is taxable to the trust. So, pag irrevocable yung trust natin, ang taxable is yung trust mismo with respect to the income of the property held in trust. Pero pag revocable yung trust, this is not considered as individual taxpayer. Meaning to say, this is not a taxable entity. Therefore, the income of properties held under revocable trust is taxable to the grantor, not to the trust. Take note, pag irrevocable yung trust, ang taxable is yung trust mismo. Pero, pag revocable yung trust, ang magiging taxable is yung grantor at hindi yung trust. What if hindi natin alam kung revocable ba yung trust or irrevocable? Ang magiging presumption natin or assumption natin dyan is that the trust is revocable. Therefore, pag revocable siya, that means this is not considered as an individual taxpayer, which is not taxable. I will give examples and we will indicate the appropriate classification for each of the examples. First, trust designated by the donor as irrevocable. Sabi ko kanina, pag irrevocable yung trust, this is considered as individual taxpayer. Accordingly, our classification for this is resident citizen. How about trust designated by the donor as revocable? Pag irrevocable, resident citizen, kasi nga considered siya as individual taxpayer. Pero pag revocable, this is not considered as an individual taxpayer. Therefore, a trust designated by the donor as revocable is not a taxpayer.